This is a continuation of the last video. So Elliot, this is about grammar, by the way. So Elliot had asked me, he made a video topic request on the word that. He also asked me why I was making videos now, and I answered that on list and covered that some in the previous video, the discussion video 15. Um, so So I'd used as my point of, oh, by the way, so I'm trying a few things differently this time. I'm trying different denoising settings because I noticed as I was listening to the previous video that I've got it pretty well set up where noise isn't picked up when there's actual silence, but I noticed some noise still getting into the dialogue. And so I'm trying more aggressive noise removal, and I did some stuff with graphics equalizer. So we'll see how much that helps. I'm trying a different video making workflow this time, which is I'm going to do this ScreenFlow Reaper workflow where ScreenFlow is going to be the app that I'm using to record. And then I'm going to use Reaper, and then actually from Reaper, I go to another app to make the file smaller. So, and the point of that is better silence removal and fewer recording bugs. So I just had like the silence removal with Screencast-O-Matic is pretty iffy, and it's like easy, but it's not very good. So I think there's a big trade-off there. So I want to try something that's a bit higher quality since I'm making so many of these. And also, I've been doing transcripts using otter.ai, which is an automated transcript service. But I've just been throwing them up like unedited, and Elliot pointed out that the amount of timestamps in the transcripts makes it a little difficult to read the transcript. And I actually made a Ruby script a while ago to remove those timestamps, like to reduce them at least, because you still want some timestamps because you want to be able to find where something is in the video roughly. But you don't want a ton like Otter does. So, but I've just been throwing the transcripts up on Pastebin without running the script. But like I already have the script, so I should use the script, you know. I was avoiding going back to doing Reaper, just because I find that whole workflow kind of annoying. Like you've got to record the video, and then put it into Reaper, and then put it into Handbrake, and then put it onto YouTube. Whereas with ScreenFlow, it's just like make the video, save it as a video file, put it onto YouTube. So it's a lot more straightforward. And it's not, these steps aren't, like the steps with Reaper and whatnot, they don't involve a ton of like active time, but it's still more steps. But based on feedback and reviewing some of the videos that I've made, I've persuaded myself just enough that it's probably worth it to go back to Reaper, at least for now, at least until I figure out a better way to do it. There's actually, I'm just like making sure it's actually recording. Because like I say, I've kept losing video in the other apps, and I'm a bit like concerned about it, you know. It's an interesting thing though. There's not actually that many ways to do automated silence removal from videos where the video gets synced up to the stuff that gets deleted automatically. In other words, there's lots of stuff that will remove silence from audio, and you can take audio from a video track and silence remove that. But to have the video then get edited so that the silent parts are also deleted from the video in a way that it like matches up to the audio that's been where the silence has been removed. That's the tricky part. And I only know like exactly 2 ways to do that on Mac at least. And one method which I've been using is kind of hit or miss in terms of the quality, and the other is a bit more of a pain in the ass, but it works well. So I'm going back to the method that's a bit more of a pain in the ass, but works well. So, and I've been, for the past couple videos, I've been using a new microphone. I have a Shure digital microphone, and it's definitely been a lot better. And I've also got it on a little arm thing, so it's like right in front of my mouth. But it's still, I've still noticed background noise stuff when I'm speaking. Now, it's a lot less bad because the quality of the device and because of how it's set up, my voice is a lot more separated. So it's a bit like a bit of and the background noise is being heavily suppressed. So instead of like an ongoing clear air conditioner hum, it's more like a bit of static or something like that trails my speech a bit. But I'd still like to get rid of that if I can. But like I think the past couple of videos have been like audible, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. But I'm going to keep fussing with it until I'm satisfied that I can't fuss with it anymore in software and would have to do something like, I don't know, rearrange my space or get like a real studio in where I'm living or something, which is not going to happen anytime soon. So we'll keep fussing with that. Okay. So with that preamble out of the way, in the last video, I was responding to Elliot's video topic request about discussion of the word that. And my point of departure was this ThoughtCo article, proper usage of that in English. And basically, I was going through the categories that it talks about, and I'm commenting on the examples and commenting on the category. And some I thought were fine, like that as a relative pronoun. I thought that was okay. Some I took objection to in principle. This was an example of that. That in a clause as an object. I had a problem with that because I agree with how Elliot analyzes these sentences, which is that instead of this whole thing being an object, this is like an object, but it's like a relative pronoun pointing to this whole clause. And I still have some issues with that because instead of a pronoun, it's more like a pro clause, and I was a bit troubled by that. But I think his analysis makes more sense. And then with one case, and this is a case that I talked about a lot, I just really disagreed with one of the examples. So it says that as determiner. That can absolutely serve as a determiner. I don't dispute that at all. It's when you're talking about these words, you just realize they always come up as you're talking about them. It's kind of funny. But so I don't dispute that is used as a determiner, but I did have an issue with this example, which struck me more as like a dummy pronoun type of usage, similar to, see if I have it somewhere here, or maybe I'll just, right, similar to something like it is important that you work hard for the exam, where if you rearrange the words, you see that it isn't actually really doing anything. And it's definitely not a determiner, because if you do the rearrangement in order to make the structure clear, that it just kind of drops out. So it's just like a placeholder. So I thought that was interesting. Right. And so the last thing I'd been talking about was, where is it here? What I'm calling that as a word introducing a subordinate adverb clause. They talk about it a little differently. That in a clause is a complement to a noun or adjective, but I think it gets to the same place pretty much. They're just using different words, and I don't particularly like calling it a complement, but I think with their explanation of how they're thinking of complement, I think it's fine. So, okay. So we're going to pick up from there. And I've just been adding things to the top in terms of the categories, because I wanted to keep, I don't know, for some reason I wanted to keep this long, like, tangent on this criticism of this example at like the bottom of this organizational structure. And I didn't have a strong preference as to what order the categories should be in. Otherwise, like, I'm not like, oh, you have to start with relative pronoun or something. So I've just been adding to the top so that the long tangential thing stays at the bottom. So I seem to, like, I can't explain that too well, but that's just what I've been doing. I can't explain the thinking there that well, but it seems fine to me. Okay. So we're going to pick up, how many more categories do we have in this article? That 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, not too many. So first, because as I've gone through this article, I'm like, hey, I object to that. So let me see if I agree with this even before I add it to my list of examples that I'm discussing. So that clause is a subject of a sentence. That clauses can introduce a phrase acting as the subject of a sentence. This use of that is somewhat formal and is not common in everyday speech. Right. So that it is so difficult is hard to understand. That Mary feels so sad is very upsetting. That our teacher expects us to do 2 hours of homework every day is crazy. These all strike me as, right. I was thinking that these that's seem to be standing for, and I hadn't even read this, for the fact that, like, the fact that it is so difficult, the fact that Mary feels so sad, the fact that our teacher expects us. And now it's talking about, related to the use of that clauses as a subject is a more common phrase, the fact that, to introduce a sentence. So this is just like a shortcut for this. I find this a bit weird because, I don't know. Like, I think this is worth mentioning, but this is giving a lot of attention to this, like, shortcut case in terms of the structure of this article. Like, I think relative pronoun usage is way more important than, like, this formal English shortcut case, but relative pronoun has like fewer examples and less words, so that's a bit strange to me. Yeah, like, I don't even, like, it's worth mentioning, and I'm going to mention it with like one example. And I'm just doing this twice because I want to be clear. I mean, the brackets give some clarity, but I just want to be clear. This is the example, and then this is the meaning. So I think it's worth breaking those out. But yeah, this is what I think. This is the amount of content I think this example warrants. you know? Because, like, I mean, there's a couple things that come into play when you're thinking about how much to talk about something in the context of other related topics. And there's like, well, I mean, I don't want to just say there's a couple things. There's like your interest level, of course. I wasn't thinking about that initially, but there's how important it is to some project, like understanding grammar and how words are used, say, and then um, there's like how hard it is to explain. So, like, I don't think this example is that important, and I think it's easy to explain. Um, Whereas with why, like, I went off on a big tangent about this determiner thing because I needed to get clear in my own mind why I didn't think this was an example of a determiner. And so that was a bit hard to explain. Like, maybe it's not the most important thing, but the explanation for me involved thinking and talking about various examples. Whereas I think this example is kind of trivial, like this topic. So that was fast, huh? Compound conjunctions with that. There are a number of compound conjunctions, words that connect with that. Compound conjunctions, that's a new one on me, that phrase. These expressions tend to be used in formal English and include in order that, so that, providing that, in case that, now that, given that. So Webster's 1913, I found, has an entry for so that, because I'm just trying to get a better sense of like the meaning here. Because I was reading this and I was like, okay, he purchased a computer. Like, I was trying to think of a way to put it without saying that, without using the word that. It was a little difficult. Like, if I want to keep this the same, because I could say he purchased the computer for the purpose of improving his typing, but then I'm changing that. So all the Webster's 1913 definitions use the word that, which is interesting. To the end that, in order that, with the effect or result that. Like with this one, if you just got rid of the that, I think it still sounds fine. Like, he purchased a computer so he might improve his typing. That sounds okay. But then, like, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is so that like a coordinating or subordinating? Because some of these other examples, like Susan told him she would marry him providing that he found a job. You could replace providing that with if. Or this example, Alice feels happy now that she has moved into a new house, which reads to me as something like, Alice feels happy now because she has moved into a new house. So basically, like, I think this category is legitimate. I'm just trying to think about it. I guess that is a word that lets you make conjunctions, because it doesn't always let you, like, we could drop the that here and it would be fine. But if we had, he purchased a computer in order he might improve his typing, that wouldn't work. You would need the that then, in order that he might improve his typing. That sounds stilted to me, but I think it's fine grammatically. But here you could delete it again. Susan told him she would marry him providing he found a new job. But here it's required. Alice feels happy now she has moved into a new house. You couldn't do that. You need the that there. Wait. How is this a compound conjunction? This is just like one word. Her? That's kind of weird. Oh, I guess it's. Oh, I'm sorry. I guess it's including the now. So I was just kind of reading. I think I was reading it like Alice feels happy now that she has moved into a new house. Instead of because, it might be better to say this is like since, like kind of equivalent. Okay, I think this is a legitimate category. I was just looking up the difference between so and so that because I'm not sure I had a good. I couldn't say it offhand. I found this page. What is this? Portland English, and it says so that tells us for what purpose something is done. So tells us the effect, what happened as a result, and it's got some examples. I'm writing this blog so that I can explain the difference between these two words. I like the self-referentialness there. So that I can explain the difference between these two words, I'm writing this blog, explaining grammar. Oh, so that isn't one word, but that's fine. Explaining grammar can be tricky, so I will try to use easy examples. Right. So, like, I get that this is effect. It's like if you said, the bank was closed, so I went home. You wouldn't say the bank was closed, so that I went home. Right. And this, like, subordinating conjunctions and adjectives, or I mean, adverbs, are like there's a relationship there, and there's a relationship between adverbs and talking about purpose. Like, that's one of the things they come up with. So, like, the so is connecting like X, so Y, like this is the state of affairs, thus this follows, whereas the so that is like the purpose, intention, or plan. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So then you shouldn't drop the that here because, like, if you want to be clear about, well, right, this is a purpose thing. So that is correct. Like, he didn't purchase the computer, right? Or his improving his typing isn't like an effect of the purchasing of the computer. It's an aspiration. It's a hope. It's a plan. So that is correct. So maybe dropping the that is like wrong. So this says. So I guess since this is a list of proper usages or something, it's talking about when you can drop that. That can be dropped after reporting verbs such as say that, tell someone that, regret that, imply that. Like, all these examples seem like this case. And so if you drop the that, you have to like mentally add it back in order to figure out what the structure of the sentence is. So, I mean, I agree that in terms of writing or speech, you can drop it, but again, this is kind of a weird, seems like a weird thing to call special attention to. I don't know. So this is more just saying when you can drop it. See, the structure of this article bothers me because initially it's talking about when to use it, and then it's mentioning some special cases, and not even all of those cases are very important, like this, like where it stands for the fact that, but then it switches to when you can drop it for like the last three entries. So that's kind of weird. So this looks like a slightly different treatment from ThoughtCo. And it's a different author who I've generally found pretty decent. So let's read this one. In English grammar, a that clause is a subordinate clause that usually begins with the word that, also known as a declarative content clause or that complement clause. A nominal that clause can function as a subject, object, complement, or a positive in a declarative sentence.
Right. So this is breaking down like nominal that clauses and relative clauses. Because relative clauses are like a modifier. Like in this one that they talk about, what's all this nonsense that you're repeating? It's nonsense is a noun, and that you're repeating is telling you. Well, the idea is that that you're repeating is telling you something about nonsense. Like, what's all this nonsense? What kind of nonsense? Nonsense that you're repeating. It'd be like if you said, what is this food that you are making? It's like an attribute of, we treat it as like an attribute of the food or indicating like which food. Oh, it's sort of, this is sort of like a determiner usage of a relative clause. Like it's telling you which nonsense. My example is like telling you which food, the food that you're making. Okay, that makes sense. Well, so I think I just figured out something important about the distinction between relative clauses and subordinate clauses. And I was looking at this email. I'd commented on Elliot's draft, it's a public draft of his grammar article in June, and I'd contrasted two things. His discussion of relative pronouns, which, like, he gives the example, John, who is a mechanic, loves restoring cars. And basically what he says is, who is a relative pronoun which creates a subordinate clause that functions as an adjective that modifies John. And that seems pretty standard. Like that's a standard interpretation. But then, like, I mean, conventional. Like, I think most grammarians would agree with that. But then he says, with regarding subordinate clauses, right? So with subordinate clauses, he views, so in something like, I drank white milk while tall John quickly eats really great cookies, he views while as a conjunction similar to and. And so my question to him was basically, why are you okay with relative pronouns making clauses into adjectives, but you depart from the conventional view on subordinating conjunctions, and instead, so I'd had a theory. I had a little Amazon delivery interruption there, by the way. So I'd had a theory that I thought maybe explained a fundamental difference between like relative clauses and subordinate conjunctions, and why you can treat relative clauses as modifiers but not subordinate conjunctions. But I think I thought about it more, and I think it's mistaken. So I was saying before, though, that basically I'd asked Elliot in this email on June 9th why he's okay with treating subordinate or relative clauses as modifiers, but subordinate conjunctions he wants to give sort of equal dignity to, as with fanboys structurally, where, you know, the like in I drank white milk while tall John quickly eats really great cookies, the wall is sort of is the big connector that's floating over everything. And he said subordinate conjunctions don't nest inside other clauses. Nested clauses are hard to interpret as being as are hard to interpret as being as important as non-nested. Much easier to interpret as mere modifiers. And I had the thought, oh, well, maybe it's the case that relative pronouns always have a dual hat sort of role. Like they're serving some function either in the main clause or in the either in the first clause or in the clause that they connect. So for example, I think that school is boring. That is serving as the object of think. Or John, who met me, likes pizza. Who is serving as the subject? Who met me? It's like John met me, likes pizza. So it's serving as a subject of this. But then, so even leaving aside adverb clauses, there's this example. My hope that you win by 20 points is intense. And this is sort of a contradictory thing, I think, because at least as depicted here, that isn't serving a like structural role. Meaning, I mean, it's serving a structural role, but it's not serving a role like in the sense of like being a main clause level, like serving as a subject, serving as an object, that sort of thing. And so my thinking was, if like relative pronouns always serve like a role within one or the other of the clauses that they're connecting, that might be a good way of distinguishing how those clauses operate from how something like a subordinating conjunction operates. And I think I was thinking of it something along the lines of, well, that's how you would know something was nested, was because there was a relative pronoun wearing two hats. But you could see here that the way Elliot's written this stuff, he's thinking of this in a very different way. He's talking about that relating a nested adverb clause, that relating a nested adjective clause. So the nestedness is like, I think it's sort of coming first in his mind, like he's identifying the nested clauses and then he's seeing how they're connected. Whereas I was trying to say, oh, because they're connected in a certain way to a word that's operating in a certain function, then they're nested. So maybe I was thinking about this backwards. I don't know. I think it was good to go down that train of thought because it at least makes more clear what's unclear, which is important. Like you have to know what's fuzzy before you can get it unfuzzy. So to put a point on that, I guess I don't really understand when stuff is nested, like how to judge that. Like this is an adjective clause. This is an adjective clause. Is this one nested and Elliot just didn't write it? Because it seems nested to me. I guess nested, does he say here? Maybe in the grammar article. Well, he's describing a view he thinks is incorrect here, so let me. Right, okay, so I think what Elliot's saying is, I think I really had to ponder that, but subordinate conjunctions, because I think what was tripping me up was that I was still thinking of stuff in terms of what he calls the confused mix view of how subordinate conjunctions work. And he gives more detail. What does he say? Most grammar materials unclearly teach a confused contradictory mix of the view that, he says both views, and like one view is that wall is a conjunction and the other view is that wall is a relator. And so when Elliot says subordinate conjunctions don't nest inside other clauses, he means subordinate conjunctions properly understood, meaning where you take the conjunction part seriously, by definition, don't nest inside other clauses. And so one way maybe of looking at the different treatment issue that I raised in my email is that, like, for something like what's a good example? So for something like my hope that you win by 20 points is intense, nobody calls that like a relative conjunction or something. Like there's a consistent treatment. For something like this case, they consistently treated something like this, where it's just a relator. Now I think I'm starting to get, because I didn't really fully grok this, like this distinction. I mean, I probably still don't fully, but I'm starting to a little bit. So for a sentence like this, the conventional view is that this is what Elliot, I think, calls a relator, and it's turning this into a modifier, this whole clause, even though it's a clause, it's turning it into like a modifier, and that's fine. But when you start calling things conjunctions, then you have to choose. Like, do you want to treat it as a conjunction, or do you want to treat it as a relator? Like if you're saying it's a conjunction, but then it's turning a clause into a modifier. Elliot's view is that's not what conjunctions do. And so this is his depiction of the confused mix view. So let's try to bring this back to where I was in my analysis of ThoughtCo. Right, okay, so I think I can read this sentence without objection now, I think, or fuzziness. A nominal that clause can function as a subject, object, complement, or a positive in a declarative sentence. Schalker and Wiener point out that relative clauses beginning with that, for example, what's all this nonsense that you're repeating, are not always included in this category. Right, because that you're repeating is a relator that is basically turning you are repeating into an adjective modifying nonsense. And I think the structure is like this, where that isn't actually serving a functional, it's just serving as a connector word. It's not within the clause. Like the clause is basically you are repeating. Okay. So this seems to just be saying that you can't use that clauses for questions or commands. That's fine. In all cases, that clause has a nominal function, is functioning as a NP, I guess noun phrase would, and answers the question what. In fact, that clauses may serve virtually all the functions served by noun phrases. That both defendants were lying was obvious to everyone in the courtroom. That's just that case of the fact that. It's just like a shortcut for saying that. This is another case. He denied the fact that we had come, like I inserted the fact, but that we had come to the end of our conversation and the end of the relationship. So this seems like the forward reference case. It's interesting to go through and try and categorize all this stuff because you start to see the patterns more. Like this is a helper verb. It's like if it's kind of like if it said I am thinking, I keep thinking. So it's saying it's ongoing. I keep thinking that she's in trouble somewhere. So she's in trouble somewhere. I keep thinking that. So I just wrote a quick email. I say, in the course of making my next grammar video, I realized that I didn't understand the issue of nestedness very well. If I understand what you're saying above correctly, the idea is that if you actually view subordinate conjunctions as conjunctions, I was trying to emphasize stuff that like if I'm emphasizing stuff in speech, I should maybe emphasize it in text. And don't go with so continuing. And don't go with a consistent nested view, which was this, view 2, or the conventional confused mixed view, which is view 3. Then by definition, the conjunctions aren't nesting stuff because they're conjunctions. Conjunctions conjoin, they don't nest. You don't object to nesting in principle, you just object to the claim that conjunctions perform nesting. By contrast, the conventional view is that relative pronouns turn stuff into modifiers, so there isn't a contradiction there that needs to be corrected, so that's fine, no problem. I'm going to say, and that's what they actually do. Conventional view is that relative pronouns turn stuff into modifiers, and that's what they actually do. So there isn't a contradiction there that needs to be corrected, so that's fine, no problem. Have I got this right? Okay, I think that's a reasonable email. Sure, yeah, everything has a... I was just checking to make sure I didn't over redact the quote levels or anything. Make sure everything has a site. So some of these examples up front, they're a little confusing. They're not, like, it starts to get categorized more later on. So I'm just going to skip over this because I'm trying to analyze them. I'm finding them a bit confusing. Or actually, I'm just pasting some of the ones I find a little tricky into an email, and I might try analyzing them on my own, or I might just send them to FI. But I want to continue looking at some of the categorical examples. Because I don't want to just look at a list of... There's some value in just looking at a list of sentences and be like, figure it out. But I'm looking for stuff that's more like... It's been a bit more organized and... So... This talks about adjective plus that clause patterns. And it gives this example. We need to be sure that they respect us and trust us. This seems to me like a variation on what I call that as a shortcut for the fact that or of the fact that, and that, so I had this example, that Mary feels so sad is very upsetting. This means the fact that Mary feels so sad is very upsetting. Here, you can't just do the fact that. You can't say we need to be sure the fact that they respect us and trust us. But you could say we need to be sure of the fact that they respect us and trust us. Right? So this second example, by the way, just a general comment is that I find it very clarifying, even if, I wind up going in a bit of a circle. I find it very clarifying to attempt a couple of things when I'm trying to figure out how something is operating. The first, like grammar-wise, the first is to restructure or rearrange the sentence, and the second is to substitute different words into the sentence. And I find that those two strategies. Oh, and the third is to imply. I should write this down. Actually, write it down in an email. I'm going to call this Justin's Thinking About Grammar Pro Tips. Or maybe Justin's Pro Tips for Thinking About Grammar. Oh, and I should mark this as grammar. If you are trying to figure out if you are doing grammatical analysis and are and you are trying to figure out how a word, phrase, clause works or what it means, etc. Trying to figure something out. Here are 3 techniques I find very helpful. Rearrange the sentence, substitute in different words for the existing ones, check for implied words. Let me put an example under each of these. Consider the sentence. So I said that this example is just a shortcut for of the fact that, which seems pretty common. Now this one's a little different. We're so sure about the reliability of our washing machines that we've given them a full 5-year parts guarantee. So I think that that's standing for that the word that, I gotta be clear. So this means that as a result, we're so sure about the reliability of our washing machines that as a result, we've given them a full 5-year parts guarantee. And if you look at the dictionary, this is Webster's Third International, used as a function word to introduce a subordinate clause expressing consequence, result, or effect, or of sufficient importance that they cannot be neglected. Meaning that as a consequence, they cannot be neglected. Now, structurally, so that's the meaning. That's structurally what's going on here. We're so sure about the reliability of our washing machines. So we are sure, right? I think it's an adverb clause. I think it fits under this category because it's saying we are so sure that yada yada. It's like, we are so sure. How sure are you? We're so sure that. So I don't know about this categorization because it's like identifying the pattern, but it isn't really explaining what's going on. So I'm just going to move on. Reporting statements with that clauses. When we report statements, we often use the that clause in the reported clause. He said that he was enjoying his work. The members of the Security Council warned that further action may be taken. So I think this all fits under the forward reference. Like, further action may be taken. The members of the Security Council warned that. He was enjoying his work. He said that. So that seems boring. In the following example, the subject in bold, okay, extra position and end weight. That sounds fancy. In the following example, the subject has been extraposed. What does that mean? I guess there's a link, so it's the internet, so we'll click the link. Although you shouldn't always click the link, but I think ThoughtCo is safe. An extraposition is a construction or transformation in which a clause that acts as a subject is moved or extraposed. This is interesting. This is talking about the thing I was complaining about before, where it was, they were calling it a determiner, but I thought it was like an expletive kind of. So this is another word for that, I guess, maybe? Let's see. An extraposition is a construction or transformation in which a clause that acts as a subject is moved or extraposed to the end of the sentence and replaced by dummy it. Dummy it. That's why they have dummies. I get it. In the initial position, also known as rightward movement. Interesting. In certain cases, extraposition of a modifying clause is prohibited. In other cases, with a small set of verbs, including appear, happen, and seem, extraposition is obligatory. Right, so these all use it. I think, like I'm familiar with how to analyze these. I think. So I'm just gonna. So let me actually, because I get the sense of what it's talking about. So let me go back to the initial article now. So I think what this is kind of getting at is that That is a word you use when you're when you want to do this structure. Oh, the subject of the sentence is the that clause. Placing this element first results in a sentence which is quite difficult to process. Therefore, the lengthy clausal subject is placed after the complement. Right, by difficult to process, they mean like you're waiting forever to get to the verb. 1, 2, that you will, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's 9 words to get to the verb. That's a long walk to get to the verb. So then they replace it with 1 word, and they just put the that clause after. But this is not something unique to that clauses. Like you could have a sentence that's like, it is questionable whether you will succeed. And that's the same sort of structure. So, like, I understand what they're saying here, but yeah, I'm not finding this an especially useful like category. Let's see what this says. Although that clause complements can work well in subject position, there is a tendency to avoid placing long, heavy clauses in this position. This reflects a more general preference for end weight. Instead, it is very common to move a that clause to a place later in the construction, a process generally known as extraposing, or postposing, or heavy shifting. They sure have a lot of words for this. Okay. So the first ThoughtCo article I read had some good stuff, although I disagreed with some of it. This one wasn't as useful. Like it's got a lot of different like quotes and perspectives from different sources, but the actual categorization and organization I didn't find that useful. So I'm going to call this a video here and hopefully do my new process or my new old process and upload this and have a better transcript and all that. So, okay.